Hey, folks, welcome back to Coaching the Bible. Awesome to be with you. It has been weeks since I have sat before this microphone and recorded anything. It's actually been weeks since I sat at this desk and done any work at this specific location. I don't remember the last time I really sat here and did work. It has been that kind of a month. It's great to be back here with everybody. Today is an intro and just a brief for season 6, which admittedly, I'll explain a little bit more in just a moment, I did not think was actually going to happen, but I'm actually really glad that it is. So season 6 is coming our way in just a couple of weeks. Explain more in just a second on that as well. Season 6 of Coaching the Bible, we're basically cutting season 5 a little bit short. We're not going to finish the 5th book of Moses for the 5th time. I apologize. Hopefully you're studying and learning on your own. But here I want to explain where we're up to and what season 6 is actually going to be all about. So let's jump right into that. The last number of weeks, I've experienced a different kind of leadership than I have ever experienced before. As I mentioned in the last listener's note, joining and serving now, even just in reserves in the Israel Defense Force, a great honor and humble honor for me. Just experiencing being the subject to commanders is different than being subject to bosses. And basic training commanders and reserves time commanders are different. And it got the mind flowing about leadership and how leadership works and how leadership looks in a way that it hadn't in a while. And so it spurred this thought for me. I want to explore some different ideas in leadership. I want to explore different ideas in coaching around that. You're not going to, say something to a commander where you're going to coach them on their leadership style in real time. Like that's just not going to happen. So you're listening and experiencing and thinking, oh, I might have said it this way. Oh, I might have said it that way. In my case, my first commander in basic training was much, much younger than me. Could have been my son in terms of age. And yet in every interaction, he is the leader and I'm the follower. He is the power and I am the powerless. That's for lack of a better term. And so it got me thinking, because as things were going on, he would say something or he would do something. And I, having studied leadership in this way for many, many, many years, had things to share and I didn't. But it was just spurred me. Okay, let's think about some of these other things and these power dynamics and leadership dynamics that exist. I'm curious about those. And so it pushed me into season 6 of Coaching the Bible. And what we're going to do this year in season 6 is we're going to go outside the lines of the 5 books of Moses. On occasion, we did that, but now we're really strictly going to be outside the 5 books of Moses and then maybe peer back in if there's a story or a moment that we haven't yet covered in 5 years that's worth covering now. We're going to dive back in. And so let's think about what this means to open up the rest of the Bible to us for consideration in this space. Here's a couple of things to think about as opening questions. What do you do when your mentor is no longer around? He's gone. And now the weight of an entire nation drops on your shoulders. So the most obvious example of that is Joshua taking the lead after Moses passes. But in the modern world, we haven't talked about what does the successor do? How does the successor act? What are the things that what are the things the successor keeps and what are the things that the successor drops? Learning from the person that came before. How do you now implement? How do you stand in those shoes? Like, what do you do with that? That's a colossal question and issue. And it comes up a lot for people when they're minimally when they're stepping into a new role, even maximally when they're stepping into, let's say, the largest role, becoming the CEO of a very large company. They're taking over leadership in a community. Like, how do you do that? Another question that comes up. What do you do when the prophet points a finger at the king and says, you are the person? Famously, that's the case of Nathan, the prophet, and David, the king, where he tells him he's the one who has violated this, who has violated this prohibition, who has done this terrible act. How do you do that? What do you say? If it's not a prophet king mode, but it's simply just a boss versus an employee mode, how do you provide that criticism? How do you provide that feedback up without it, rearing its ugly head, without it backfiring on you, without it, shedding some sparks in your direction. These are heavy questions. Or when a single reckless vow leads to a leader's own downfall. Let's say you have a yiftach in Hebrew moment. I think it's Jephthah in English, maybe it's not, in the book of Judges, where he vows if he wins a battle, whatever comes out of his house is going to sacrifice an offer to God. It turns out to be his daughter. Spoiler alert. What do you do when you say things that you shouldn't say? What do you do when something that you say violates a core tenet principle of who you are as a leader, as a company, as a person? Can you step back off of that? How does that work? We talked a little bit about this, but let's look at a new lens and a new story and see how that works. And so for 5 years, we've been traveling with Moses in the wilderness. We've been with with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We've been with Joseph. We've been with Sarah and Rebecca and Leah and Rachel. We talked about Laban. We talked about Pharaoh. We talked about Aaron. We talked about a lot of the different people in the 5 books of Moses. And now it's different. The ultimate leader is gone. The paradigm of leadership, our teacher, Moses, is gone. And so now it's no longer that one-man show. And now leadership comes in a lot of different forms, in a lot of different shapes, in a lot of different sizes, from a lot of different places. And, we have to think about people who are warriors, people who are judges, people who are prophets, people who are kings, poets, visionaries. Some are inspirational, some are massive failures, some do both in the same breath, at the same time, in the same moment. And the truth is, why to do this now? Because this is really where leadership gets incredibly messy, but also excitingly real. The rest of the Bible after the 5 books of Moses is what I'll call, on some level, real life Bible. The books in that first section of the prophets, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings, all those books are the people living after they've entered the land, and they're now settling the land and trying to make it work. And to me, that is very much speaks to a lot of who we are and where we are at this moment. And so we want to answer some of those big questions. And we want to dip back in to these interesting moments and explore with the people who are living it, sitting on their shoulder, or being just having a bird's eye view, or sitting at a distance and watching the entire scene unfold, and how that works. So we'll talk about Samuel, we'll talk about Saul, David, Elijah, we'll talk about Deborah, we'll talk about Gideon, we'll talk about Hannah, we'll talk about all of these different amazing people and how that all worked. And so here's a glimpse. Let's start with Joshua. Joshua inherits Moses' mantle, which is effectively a task that's impossible. How do you lead after Moses? If the prior leader was an abject disaster, so it's easy, you come into a situation where the previous coach never won a game, you really don't have a lot to worry about. But if your prior leader was Moses, who took you out of Egypt, freed you from being slaves, brought you to Sinai, went up to God and brought down the 10 commandments, did it again, brought you to won all kinds of wars, taught you for 38 years, 40 years in the desert, brought you to the cusp of the promised land. Like, how do you follow that? And so the truth is that Joshua does follow. He brings the people across, fights a lot of wars, wins a lot of battles, and he helps settle the land. And so one question to think about is, how do you lead when every step that you take is measured against the memory of the greatest leader that ever lived? Now, Joshua's not focused, certainly not at the beginning, about legacy building. And he does not appear to be overtly focused on differentiating between himself and Moses. And yet, if we start to scratch the surface on it, we'll notice how Joshua actually is, not just instinctively, but intentionally leading in a different way, in a different manner from the beginning. And that's our entry point into this entire conversation about how do you lead? How do you lead in those situations? How do you lead when it gets messy? And that's only the beginning. So we're going to talk about fire on the top of the mountains. We're going to talk about whispering in the caves. We're going to talk about courage and collapse. We're going to talk about failure and redemption. And really, when you think about it being messy, that's the term I used before. When it's not needed and it's not perfect, the truth is that's when it's exceptionally, incredibly human. and it's quite relatable and connectable for us as human beings. And so that's what's going to be going on this year in season 6. I'm excited for it. It's going to come in singular episodes. We might do a series on a certain character. We might go deeper. I'm going to try this year to bring on people who are much bigger Bible scholars than I am. I am not a Bible scholar, but much bigger, much bigger Bible scholars, to talk about some of their most interesting and favorite people in the Bible from a leadership perspective, from all kinds of perspectives, learn from them, have them teach me some really power lessons about this, because I really want to learn. My most successful episode ever of Coaching the Bible last year when I had one guest on, David Leitner. It was super interesting. We talked about the sin of the golden calf. And so I want to explore that a little bit more. We try and work out, this has been an issue for me since the beginning, the cadence of delivery, and try to avoid the Thursday, Friday thing. It's not good for my health. It's not good for anybody else. I really want it earlier in the week to invest in the episodes and in the conversation. And I look forward to hearing from you as well. If you have a story, an incident, a moment in the Bible that's interesting to you, that you want me to explore, you want me potentially to explore with me, and really get the full picture, lean in on some of the power lessons, teach me some things, and learn together about leadership and coaching in the Bible from these incredible people, I'm open for it and I'm game for it. Hit me up. You see this post, message me either wherever the episodes are linked and hosted, or just shoot me an email. I think there's a lot of ways to connect with me to get there. And let's do this. Season 6 is coming in just a couple of weeks. Take care.